You're listening to Mondays Unfiltered, the podcast for anyone who's accepted that work is inevitably work. We're your hosts, Heather and Kristen. We break down burnout, baffling policies, and corporate chaos with dry humor and real solutions. Grab your coffee and whatever optimism survived the weekend, Mondays have begun. A little about us. Kris spent decades helping executives shape brands and craft messages that inspire, and I built systems that actually made those visions work behind the scenes and kept people from falling apart in the process. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Heather, how are you today?
Hey, nice to see you again.
Good. Good. Nice to see you too. And you're feeling better, right?
Yes.
I wasn't listening. Um,
How
guess what
ironic.
guess what we're talking about today, people? We're talking about listening. So, it is so important in life and certainly personal life. I'm sure there's plenty of spouses out there who've said, "Hey, you're not listening to me," and that's a big issue in some relationships. Familial relationships. But this is really to talk about listening at work. And so let's kick this off with a fun quote that I found. And I think this is kind of funny. So she gave me a bunch of crap about me not listening to her or something. I don't know. I wasn't really paying attention. Do you know where that's from, Heather?
No.
Dumb and Dumber.
Oh, yes, it is. I can totally see the scene now.
um, So, our stat today is Forbes article cited Edelman's 2024 trust barometer as saying a significant statistic to building trust was listening. And 82% of the respondents to that survey said that being given a voice is essential to building trust. So, we are talking about listening today. And it's kind of funny because I think I've talked about my bachelor's degree is in organizational effectiveness, organizational behavioral effective communication and effectiveness.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Um, it is a mouthful. Um, one of the classes I had as an undergrad was listening. And I was like, why do they have a class on listening? And back then I was like 20 something. And in all honesty, it's probably one of the most important classes I had because we learned how to really listen and do reflective listening. So, do you know
Mm.
what reflective listening is?
To me, it means what being able to recite back what I heard was.
Right, correct. And there's a lot of kerfuffles and issues in work life where, due to a lack of listening, or sometimes we listen for what we want to hear
Mhm.
instead of listening to what the person is saying. Um, Now, we're not psychologists, but what I mean by that is somebody's waiting for some answer that supports their position, or they go in there with an expectation of that person, and they're not listening to a whole situation.
Mhm.
Um, I'm going to try to summarize this really quickly. Um, New team brought in to help build an enterprise function. And they were in a meeting. The example is build internal software. If there is a solution from another partner, bring it in. So the IT team was to do 3 vendors, do an evaluation on them. This person sent a report back from the meeting and said their recommendation is build this internally. And this went up to the CEO, and the CEO had a fit and said, no, that was not what I said. What turned out to be the case is the IT department wanted to build all their own stuff because they felt threatened by another vendor coming in with a solution. and it took a long time to clarify what had actually been said.
Mm.
And so not listening is a really, really big problem. On top of that, and I'll let you speak in a second, I'll listen, is imagine the times as an employee, and we've all been through this, especially when we're newer in our careers, where you have an idea that you want to share. And there's no platform for you to share the idea. So we talk a lot about trust on this show. What does that say about trust or lack of trust if you don't listen to your employees or your team and you don't listen to ideas?
Mm-hmm.
You could be missing innovation.
Mm-hmm.
You could be missing subtleties to a problem. So, especially if you have a staff and they're on the front line and they're dealing with stuff and there's a subtlety, how many times have you been in a situation like that? So, listening isn't very sexy, but it's a really important component to, really good working relationships. What do you think?
I think that a challenge with listening in the workplace is that it takes time.
It's
And there's always a sense of urgency and emergency. And like so much of the time that I spent in my career was a fire drill. It was like, we needed
Yeah.
this yesterday, blah, blah, blah. And so when you take the time to listen to somebody and understand their perspective or their position or considerations and alternatives, it takes too much time. So it's not, we don't have the time to listen. And I think that's probably where a lot of downfall comes in. Um, a problem that I have been working on overcoming myself is um, in that timing perspective as well, is waiting my turn. And so we've talked previously about ADHD and autism and neurodiversity. And I definitely
Full
fall,
disclosure, sorry, I'm interrupting you.
that's okay.
Both Heather and I have ADD, ADHD. I don't know. So
I
both
definitely
Heather and I
fall
have
into
it.
neurodiversity where
Yeah.
I have sensitivities to things and um, I'm very emotional. And I'm sure plenty of people are, but when I started learning about neurodiversity and spectrum disorder, and I started recognizing traits in myself that I've struggled with in my career and personal life, my entire life, it was a light bulb went on and it was like a punch in the gut, almost like now I understand. And it was elevating for me. I really was happy to learn that I wasn't just I'll just be really generic with it. Like that I wasn't being a jerk, that I wasn't being lazy, like that there's reasons behind the actions that I take, and now I'm learning to work with them. So one of my long-standing issues has been interrupting, and it's because something pops into my head and I get excited about it and I just want to share it with you, or that I want to be able to relate to you. So I share a story that is in relation to what you're sharing. And it comes in the form of not listening, but in actuality is I have listened and I'm trying to participate. But there's a time and a place, and I spend a lot of time in my head going, relax, wait a minute, make a note so that when it is your turn, you can share and you can listen to the full story. Like, for instance, this weekend, I was at an event and there was a panel discussion, and they were sharing perspectives on career development. And I raised my hand, and the woman said, we're going to take questions at the end, so just wait. And it was like murder for me to wait. And so I made sure that I was making notes in my notebook about things that I wanted to ask. And sure enough, as we progressed through the panel discussion, they achieved every question that I had pending. So I just needed to wait and understand that, the concerns that I had were going to be met. And if they weren't, then there was a time and a place for me to share my insight.
Yeah, I think that's, that's I think that's admirable that you notice that. And by the way, it takes a long time
Hmm.
to realize that, especially if you do have ADHD. And I I actually went and got diagnosed about 5 years ago because I did have the same issue kind of as, a manager was like, hey, you know what, Kris, sometimes you don't listen. And I was like, what? And I was the same motivation. It was, I wanted to participate. Um, in this case, I was working with all men, and I love men. So it's not a guy girl thing. It's nothing like that, but it was sometimes hard to find a place to share. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's good that you notice that, and it's a
Hmm.
skill that you're working on.
Yeah.
And it is a skill. You have to listen. I mean, excuse me, you have to develop that ability to do
Practice.
that. And I think in working with clients all the time, that's where I had an easier time listening to clients because it was incumbent upon me to
Right.
advocate for them.
Right.
And sometimes you're also dealing with people that are kind of upset. And so
Hmm.
you better listen to everything they say.
Hmm.
One of the things that I learned, and I touched on this in the beginning of the session, is how do you show that you're listening and understanding, and it's reflecting back to the person.
Hmm.
So in the example I gave of that meeting and the kerfuffle with like, do we build it internally or do we bring in an external solution that it's to kind of repeat back, hey, we talked about XYZ. This is where we landed. By the way, the CEO has a mandate that if we can buy it or partner with a trusted source, we're going to do that rather than waste our precious IT resources. So in that situation, then you reflect back the summary of the meeting. And I would say that's where kind of, in some cases, you have to do the CYA, or CYB, cover your butt. Um, because, you know, you don't know that person listened.
Right.
And and also listening to the sense of not not for a time to speak, not for the answer that you're looking for, but really listen to what the point of view is. Um, and I don't know where this came from because I don't have the reference to it, but I probably put a list together from different sources. So forgive me for not relying on quoting one source. But it was like listening improves employee morale, builds trust. There's that word.
Yeah.
I think we're going to talk about trust a lot.
Yeah.
You'll have more engagement. We've talked about that before too. Again, you'll have better ideas and innovation. Um, and then, more people feel empowered or engaged in the process.
Hmm.
I think I remember you to saying one thing one time too about being someone that doesn't always speak up. What were you saying about that, where you didn't
Yeah, there was a
feel
long time in my
safe?
career where I didn't say anything just because if I would attempt to participate, I would get a look or I felt intimidated. I'm definitely an introvert, so it takes energy for me to share my perspective. And there's like an internal battle that goes on inside me of, is this something I should share now? Does anybody care? You know, there's more that goes on inside my head than actually comes out of my mouth. And so sometimes I don't say anything. And my husband and I have struggled in being together as long as we have, we've developed our communication style with ourselves similarly. So like he will also just look at me and I'll be like, why aren't you saying anything? And he's like, because I'm listening to you. And I'm like, but I need you to respond to me. But that's not his mode. His mode is to take it all in and absorb it and then come back when he's ready to discuss it, where I'm like, right now. So that's interesting. And there's different ways that people listen. I listen better when I'm taking notes because I'm paying attention to what's being said,
Hmm.
and then I can go back and review it. And sometimes when I'm just sitting there speaking to someone and sitting and attempting to listen, my brain goes off on a tangent. My brain starts noticing things in the room, the way that the person is talking, what they're wearing, everything to distract me, which is why I'm much better listening by taking notes.
See, it's funny because I do better not taking notes. So if I'm in a long conversation with somebody, I find it distracting sometimes to look down and take notes. So if I hear something like a stream of notes, so if I hear something and we're in a long conversation, what I'll do is if the person's explaining something to me, I may stop them or just say, "Hey, 1 second, I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying, that I understood correctly what you're telling me." And then I'll repeat back to them what I understood, which is something we learned in class, right? Um, it's also a skill that I had to develop, right?
Mhm,
Um, and then I'll say, hold on 1 second, let me just write that down, especially if there's something complex or
mhm,
some numbers I need to remember or something, then I'll write that down. But I found that if I just take, notes, then I just forget it.
mhm,
And the funny thing is, these AI note takers, I do better going back over the actual notes. So the output of the note taker versus rewatching
mhm.
a video.
And I have a different experience in typing content, listening and typing versus listening and handwriting, which is an
Yeah.
old skill that is not being taught. And, maybe they'll bring it back. I don't know. But um, I feel like there's a challenge in digital note taking because you have the potential of being distracted into another thing. So, like often when I would be on a WebEx, whatever, Zoom, whatever, I would be looking at my email or I would be um, tempted to go research something. When something was said, I'd be like, oh, I want to look that up. And then I get distracted. And then 5 minutes passes and I don't know what they just said. And there have been plenty of times where someone had said to me, and I know one particular, because I often speak up now more than I used to and share insights and information. I was in a meeting where I was not paying attention and I got called out and they said, Heather, do you have anything to add? Because you normally have so much to say. And I was like, nope, all good over here. But I had no idea what they were talking about.
That's a really good point. Now, do you mind if I kind of lean into that for a
Yep.
second? I think it's even harder. I like your point about the note taking. So I want to kind of edit what I just said. It's not that I don't take any notes, it's that I do take notes, but I had to adjust how I do it. And I'm with you on I much prefer writing them. So even though there is an AI note taker, I'll still use the technique that I
Sure.
used
Hmm.
for taking notes. I think with having so many meetings on Zoom or whatever that is, it's very hard to, especially if that's all you're doing is you're sitting like we are all day on Zoom, it's very hard to pay attention.
Hmm.
I'm much better if I'm in a room and I'm very empathic. So I like to I like to look around the room. I like to pick up on how people are reacting, how they're feeling. And then I notice things and I can reflect those back to them. But it's a very hard thing to do. It's not as satisfying, as a human interaction. For me, it just isn't. I
Agreed.
know it's expeditious. People don't have to work in the same room. Um, so I think it makes it that much harder to listen because if it's not something that you have a direct deliverable or it's a subject that you're bored with, it's so easy to just flip off and do research. I'll do that like when I like history, so I'll watch something on history and I'll pause and then I'll go look it up because I go down rabbit holes. I'm like that too. Is that an AD thing? I don't
I don't
know.
know, maybe.
Um, but I think We're going to talk about meetings at some point and doing, constructive meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Doing short meetings certainly is helpful to keep people's attention. Having an agenda is helpful
Mm-hmm.
to having an
But I
attention.
digress.
Huh?
But I digress.
So going back, I think that would help with listening
Yeah.
is keeping it a succinct meeting. And it's not even just for ADHD. I think it's also for just in general, especially if you're on Zoom all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Maybe asking questions during the meeting. That was a trick
Yeah.
salespeople would do,
Yeah.
is pepper in questions
Yeah. That's really, and
during.
there was something in continuing education to make sure that they know that you're engaged and not just sitting on your computer letting it run while you do other things. They started peppering in intermittent questions to make sure that you were paying attention, A, and that you were engaged in the programs so that you had to participate to show that you were actively watching it run, that you couldn't hit fast forward, you couldn't, increase the speed of it or anything like that. But you made a comment in there that I think we can touch on also is you were evaluating the responsiveness and the engagement of the audience in the room. And I think that plays into listening too, is to read the room, especially for the person who's leading the meeting or the conversation, is to look for those little changes, because then you can ask the question, did that make sense? Do you agree? Do you have something to add to that, so that the like when you see a facial expression change, or like I was in a meeting last week, someone was sharing a story about themselves and someone in the audience rolled their eyes. And I was like, okay, well, that was a huge signal that we have to follow up on. Like that definitely didn't hit the way that you wanted it to. So let's inquire to figure out what it was that drew that response. And that's where listening to your client comes into play as well, is to take the time to ask questions. Is this giving you the satisfaction that you were seeking by working with us? Is there anything that we could do to improve services? Are there services that you wish we had that we could grow our business into? Those are all opportunities to listen, but you have to pose the question first.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But it was a way that, you could make people engaged, just like you pointed out. You have to ask the person you're talking to, does this make sense? Tell me about your situation. Um, what problems are you experiencing? How are you currently doing it? I mean, those are just
Right,
simple questions, right? Like
right,
it's situational. um, and then listen to them
right.
so that then when you have a conversation with them, whatever you're saying to them is more relevant
Hmm.
to the conversation.
Right. It's one thing to ask, but it's another thing to absorb the response. Um, I often would ask, like, here's a great example, and I'm sure so many people can relate to this. Hi, what's your name? 5
Kristen,
seconds later, what's their name?
Kristen.
I know, but like so many people don't listen. So even though they asked it, they didn't listen. And someone else will walk up and be like, what's that person saying? I can't remember. And it was like 5 seconds ago. Or even when you're at the grocery store and someone says, have a great day, or something where, or like you're at a fast food restaurant and they go, enjoy your meal, and you say, you too. Well,
Yeah.
they didn't order the meal. You should
Yeah.
be listening to what they're saying.
Yeah. Well, I think those are like little pleasantries, and we just automatically kind of
Right.
spew them out to each other. I think the name thing is interesting because I do forget names sometimes. And especially if I'm in a situation where, let's say I'm at a networking event or a conference or something, and there's so much going on, and I will apologize in
Hmm.
advance. I'm like, it's going to take me a time or two to remember your name, but I'll remember the conversation.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like if it's an engaging conversation, I'll remember what it is. But I think that's a good point. Is there a little trick you can do if remembering people's name is really important, which it is just, ask yourself just after they say their name, like, okay, Heather, just introduce herself. And you go, oh, that's Heather.
Right. Well, there is
So,
a trick. The trick is that you find 3 opportunities immediately to repeat it. So you say, "Oh, Kristen, it's nice to meet you. Kristen, what do you do for a living?" And even though it sounds almost contrite, where you're like being, you're minimizing the name, it's solidifying it in your brain. So, and another way to do it is to introduce that person to someone else. And
oh,
so,
right.
you know,
I've done that.
you're bringing them and you're reinstilling that you know who it is that you're speaking to.
Right.
But I
Right.
also have become comfortable with saying to someone, "I'm sorry, remind me of your name." Where
Yeah.
I
Oh, me
know for
too.
sure we've met before, but I did not recall your name.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a common thing. And, um, but I think, and I don't have a whole list like I normally do. One of the benefits to listening, aside from having people feel listened to or involved and trusted and engaged, is that you cut down on problems and issues and time suck and time waste if you just listen. So, the example I recounted to you, that person was also discounting the other people in the room
Right.
because that department had a certain idea of how they wanted to do things. So there was a lot of bad feelings. There was a lot of wasted time on everybody's part by not
Yeah.
listening.
Well, and some of these more current terms, and you've said before woke terms, it creates psychological safety, which is true. It it's not an opportunity um to exercise a soft skill. It's you're building trust. It's a part of leadership. You're telling the people that they matter, and that they're safe in that space, and that, like you had said before, that you don't have to fight for airtime to be able to be heard. The people that are a leadership that is listening, that's active engagement, and they're going to get better information and better decisions in order to grow and listen to their people, and then people are going to remain engaged, and they're not going to
Right.
have that checked out personality where they're like, it doesn't matter what I say because you're not listening to me.
Right.
So take the
Uh,
time.
Agreed. And I think, I always talk about Patrick Lencioni, but an example he talked about with the 5 dysfunctions of a team, the 5 dysfunctions of a CEO, is you do have to have enough confidence in yourself to be open to listening to people. And I think we talked about this particular benefit is that you could get information, ideas, um, flaws, things that if you didn't listen to somebody or your team, that you wouldn't get.
Right.
That would save you money, save you time.
Yeah.
Plus, it makes people more engaged. So,
Yeah.
love to hear people's. Again, it's not a sexy subject. I have one more thing that's a benefit of listening. If I can share it, is that okay? Do we have enough
Sure,
time to
sure.
do that?
Yeah.
So one of the people I coach, she's like an executive director, and she's now in a position where she has to do more talking, at least internally, and reports and that kind of thing, and events, internal events. And she was always really nervous about it. And, has to do more talking in meetings, etc. And I said, hey, a trick to make you feel more comfortable is to think of some questions, I mean, relevant to the subject of the meeting or whatever it is that you have to talk with, and ask questions and then listen to answers. And I said, if you just focus on that and focus on the other people and the questions that you're asking, the subjects, I mean, they need to be relevant, you'll feel a lot more confident. You won't be as nervous.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't like re memorizing content to be just repeating it back and spitting it out. I am so much more comfortable when I know a subject that I can just have a conversation about.
Right. And if you ask questions, and you listen to the answers, it's a lot easier to have an organic conversation.
And I feel like it's absorbed better by the attendees because they're engaged in learning and participating rather than being spoken at.
Right. That's where you start, like your eyes start drifting away and you look at your phone and stuff like that. So I think we talked a lot about listening. I'd love to hear everybody's opinion. I have a quote from the Dalai Lama, if
Ooh,
we want to close this one out,
I
because I
love
love
the
the
Dalai
Dalai Lama.
Lama.
I love the Dalai Lama. So he said, when you talk, you are only repeating what you know. But if you listen, you may learn something new.
I love it. That's a
So
great
a
one.
little bit of inspiration. That was a good talk.
Yes, thank you for listening.
We'd love to talk more about real situations. So if you can share them with us, please write to us. We promise to listen to you. To Kris and Heather, and our email address is mondaysunfiltered@gmail.com.
And we accept the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So, so until next time, stay unfiltered.
We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's it for this episode of Mondays Unfiltered. If something today made you laugh, think, cringe, or finally question the workplace norms you've been conditioned to accept, good. That's where change begins. If you enjoyed the conversation, hit subscribe, share the episode with someone who deserves a better Monday, and help us push the movement towards healthier, more human workplaces. And we want to hear your stories, the surprises, the successes, the dysfunction, the burnout, the breakthroughs. Just send them our way. Your experience might shape a future episode. And remember, we can do better, we can be better, and we don't have to tolerate BS just because it feels familiar. Until next week, stay curious, stay courageous, and stay unfiltered.